Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Caplen, editor of The Banker. I'm here with Gottfried Leibbrandt, who's the chief executive of SWIFT, and we're previewing Sibos in Boston 2014. And obviously regulation is going to be high on the agenda. I mean, what are the sort of regulatory issues and challenges that the banks are facing now?
They're significant by any stretch of the imagination. They're facing regulation on capital requirements, which really has impact on costs, on businesses that they're in, etc. They're facing regulations on their market infrastructure, CPSS, IOSCO, reporting requirements in terms of trade data. They're facing regulation in terms of what I would call behavior, which is anti-money laundering, know your customer, sanctions, and everything that go with it. So there's a whole onslaught, I would say, on banks of regulation and a need to put in place the systems, the monitoring systems, the people and all of that to deal with that.
All right, and obviously SWIFT has done a number of initiatives in some of these areas, particularly the sanctions and know your customers. So give us a little bit of a sort of review of what you've put in place and what's to come.
So what we put in place, trying to take an incremental and gradual approach. We put in place a sanction screening service that allows people to copy their SWIFT payment messages onto a screening engine and then signal whether there are hits or not. So that one we've put in place. It's primarily aimed at smaller and medium-sized banks who don't want to run that software in-house. So it's a cloud service, if you will. That one has met with very significant take-up. I think we're close to 200 participants on that one, and that one is up and running. The other one, big initiative that we're working on, is a Know Your Customer repository. Really have a central place for banks where they can get data on other banks. Know your correspondent bank really is what it's about. We've been able to sign up almost all of the major clearing banks for that service, which will go live later this year. So that is the big thing that we're working on right now. In addition, we have offered quite successfully a sanctions testing service that essentially allows you to take, for those banks that run in-house filtering engines, it essentially offers a diagnostic tool to see how those engines are calibrated. Are you picking out the right ones? Are you having too many false positives, etc., and tweak those engines? We've developed that service with an outside company that we've since acquired, and that one we've seen more than half of all the major banks now subscribe to that service. So that nicely complements the sanction screening service for the low end. This is really aimed at the high end.
All right, now we know that the banks have got themselves into some real difficulties with some of these issues, particularly the sort of sanctions and so forth. What about the liability when you're running these kinds of services? Does it sit with SWIFT or does it sit with the banks?
It primarily sits with the banks. At the end of the day, what we do is we offer a well-prescribed service, for example, in sanction screening, to test against an agreed list of hits that they can check. It is their responsibility at the end of the day to act upon that, to correct payments, to make sure that they submit the payments. It is our responsibility to meet the service requirement, which is to actually screen the payments against those. So yes, as we are in all of our services, we are liable to meet that. At the same time, we cannot judge the content of it. As soon as there is a hit, the bank will have to decide, in the broader context, is it a justified hit? Can they get additional data? Can they check it, etc.? So I think a large part of the liability will and should remain with the banks, but yes, we face the liability for executing against our service description.
So, I mean, what SWIFT is doing here is obviously becoming a sort of back office utility in a way for the industry. So how much do you see that becoming, a substantial role for you in relation to, which has been your traditional business, which has been the messaging?
We see it as a natural extension. We've always been a shared platform, a cloud service and shared platform for processing for payment messages and later securities messages. This falls into that same shared platform ID. We've seen the banks really come to us and others, to be fair, with a real need to have shared infrastructures rather than do everything themselves and duplicate costs. Especially when it comes to sanction screening, when it comes to sanctions testing, but also KYC for correspondent. We see that as a very natural extension of what we already do in a shared service way. So yes, for us, that's quite close to what we've been used to doing.
Okay, now, I mean, you mentioned the whole host of regulations that are up and coming there. I mean, one in particular that I think is quite critical for the sort of trade and payments area is the Basel Committee has put down these guidelines on intraday liquidity and changed quite fundamentally how you have to account for liquidity. Yeah. I mean, how much do you think that's going to impact the industry, and how much are they on the way to solving those kinds of problems or coming to terms with what they have to do?
We've signaled this a while back, and in fact we put out a white paper on it a while back. We've also traditionally had in place solutions to deal with it, because people can use the SWIFT messages to report on their liquidity position with other banks. You can use SWIFT, a number of the SWIFT MTs, to get intraday reports. Where do I stand with my liquidity positions? You can take a copy of your fin messages to see what liquidities movements are taking place with your major counterparts. So we've had solutions in place traditionally to deal with it, and we're seeing now that the pressure is really on banks, we're seeing a real take-up of that, and now we're seeing that solutions we put in place a while back are really being used and picked up. So in that sense.
Okay, and then just finally, I mean, with so much regulation on the agenda, is there a danger that the banks are, taking their eye off the ball of what they should be doing, in a more kind of forward-looking, innovative sense?
Yeah, I think that is the real challenge for the banks. As I talk to them, they have on the one hand to comply with all of these regulations, sucking up all of their change capacity, their IT capacity, and at the same time around them the business is changing fast. New entrants, new competitors, new business models emerging in both payments and in securities. They will have to react to that. They will have to innovate. And they will have to adapt. There's a bit of a flip side that those new players will also face the regulatory burden, and to some extent it levels the playing field a little bit. But the large players, all of the CIOs I talk to express this concern. They have to do both. They have to comply with all these regulations and innovate and adapt. And yeah, here we are in the lab of SWIFT, our innovation lab, but clearly that's a big theme for both us and the financial institutions.
Okay, let's come and talk about the innovation in just a second.